Hello and welcome to the program. I am Mary Kanu. Nigeria has been ranked 8th in the 2023 Global Terrorism Index with 385 deaths recorded. The ranking comes as progress after the country moved 2 places away from the 6th position it occupied in the 2022 ratings. To achieve further decline, President Bola Tinubu has solicited the support of the United Nations in Nigeria's fight against terrorism in light of its ripple effect on global peace, displacement of people and rising poverty. The president made the appeal at an audience with the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations Office on Counter-Terrorism, Vladimir Voronkov, at the State House. The president said that terrorism had consistently reversed the gains in development and increased instability in families and communities. He said that the UN needed to be more consistent in dealing with it in the developing world context. Meanwhile, the Chief of Army Staff, Lieutenant General Taoreed Lagbaja, has disclosed that members of Boko Haram and Islamic State for West African province now kidnap for ransom and rob citizens to keep up with their nefarious activities. Lagbaja, while speaking during his visit to Maiduguri, Borno State, to assess the security situation in the state, said that the development is a discovery by the service of the new tactics used by the terrorist organizations in the country. He, however, promised to provide combat enablers to support ongoing operations in the region. Well, let's get an expert view on this report. Dennis Mercury, former director, Department of State Services, joins me now on the program. It's good to have you join me. Now, Nigeria has battled insecurity and terrorism for so long, like we cast our mind back, and it feels like terrorism has been with Nigeria for so long. So how would you assess the government's efforts in tackling terrorism in the country?
Thank you very much for having me. You see, this particular subject matter has been on for so long. In fact, the Nigerian federal government has gone ahead and appointed a director for counter-terrorism way back. That was even during President Jonathan's time. And then, of course, in 2014, we came up with the National Counterterrorism Strategy, which is a document, beautiful document. And 9 years or so ago, we've not been able to effectively make it operative. So I'm very, very happy at this particular movement where the United Nations Counterterrorism Office is coming to sign this MOU with us, and then, of course, make it operative by also signing the MOU on counterterrorism travel program.
All right, so Nigeria's terrorism, that's the Prevention and Prohibition Act of 2022, provides an enhanced framework, to prevent, prosecute, and punish acts of terrorism. As an expert, do you think this has been effective so far?
That's what I'm saying. It has not been very effective because we even have a document, like I said, the National Security Strategy document, which is supposed to give life or backing to it. But it has not been able to be effective. So the military has done a lot. They've tried to counter terrorism, especially in the Northeast. But you can see that we've been fighting this for more than 10 years. More than 10 years. And if we are not succeeding after 10 years, then there is a problem. There is something that we need to do to make it very, very effective. Although there are certain wins we are getting recently, especially with the new service chiefs that we have.
So talking about wins now that you've mentioned, the reports we're talking about now, that's the Global Terrorism Index for 2023, it shows a continuous decline in the number of deaths from terrorism. Nigeria has seen it has moved down the ladder of nations most impacted by terrorists. Now, one will wonder how they came about this figure of 385 deaths so far in 2023. So is it, I know it is cherry news, but is this really Nigeria's reality?
Well, I even know some security experts that have basically collecting data, and they collect data up to the extent of every single act of terrorism is being documented and recorded. And then, of course, a meaningful narrative is published either quarterly or bi-yearly. But you see, these things are happening in such a way that you cannot formally, know exactly, because, for instance, there are so many unreported cases. Let's talk about kidnapping. So many unrelated, unreported cases, and we don't know whether these data that is being given out, at least it gives you some kind of idea about the level of what is going on. But I'm happy that at least we can also feel it as a public that terrorist activities have gone down a little bit as compared to some 10 years ago.
All right, now, so we know that the army has said, you mentioned kidnapping. We know that the army has said, kidnapping for ransom has become a stock in trade for terrorists. So what then would you say can be done to serve as a deterrent, for enablers of this crime?
Well, kidnapping is a means of making money by terrorists. And then, of course, if we want to counter kidnapping, there are two major ways that we can do it. The first one, which is very extensive, of course, is to look at the root causes of kidnapping and then deal with those root causes, minimize them, mitigate them to the barest minimum. And then the second one is putting in place technology to deal with kidnappers. In a country like Mexico, for instance, or Colombia, you find out that before kidnapping, it was the number one. If you look at that global index of terrorism, you find out that Colombia and even Mexico, they are ranking up there. And they started deploying other kinds of techniques, including technological techniques, which has minimized, although they are still up there, but the number has reduced drastically. So we in Nigeria can also do that by making sure that we deploy technology and then, of course, give it the proper attention that it needs. Because when you have people kidnapped, what do? Many people will just keep quiet and negotiate with terrorists. Many people will go and report to the police or DSS. And then, of course, there are so many cases in such a way that proper attention is not given to, any particular case. And you find out that the kidnappers sometimes end up getting the ransom they are looking for and then release the victim and then go ahead and kidnap another one again. So we have to give it proper attention in eradicating that scourge that we have.
All right, talking about proper attention, we know that our new president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, has been seeking ways to curb, insecurity and terrorism. And, one of the ways he's doing this is seeking international support help. So he has urged the United Nations to be consistent, in combating terrorism and insurgency in the developing world context. So would you say, we're talking about support now, would you say the United Nations has been consistent enough?
Yes, well, the United Nations is one body that has been consistent in sharing information, because the United Nations does not have a standing army that they are going to use in fighting terrorism or, stop the radicalization. But from what is happening right now, especially with the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism, we have a situation where they are very, very serious. And like I said earlier, this signing of this MOU is going to help us because it is now going to make our national security strategy to be more, how do I put it now? It should be more active. It will be an active document instead of just a document that is written and a beautiful document that is written and put on the shelf. It is going to be a very, very active document because especially the second MOU that was signed, which is the counter-terrorism for travel program, that is effective because, again, that helps in the, should I say, making sure that terrorists don't travel around, because terrorists do travel around, and they are monitored from wherever they are. So it will effectively put the 4 pillars, so to say, the 4 pillars of the United Nations counter-terrorism strategy, which is to prevent. And then, of course, prevention means to stop the radicalization, because many terrorists get into it because of being radicalized ideologically. They are, and of course, when they are very, very radicalized, they move around causing problems. So the second pillar will be to pursue them and make sure that they don't carry out what they are doing. And it is during this pursuit aspect of it that the terrorism travel program becomes very, very effective, because now you can keep watch lists of known terrorists who are all over the place, traveling between Europe or even through the Sahel into Africa, and then keeping track of them. So when they pursue them, the next one is to protect the targets that are likely to be hit are protected. And then, of course, you prepare for future. And that is a very, very serious aspect, because it has to be very robust, and it has to be very, very active when it comes to preparing people, like public orientation, awareness, security awareness, and then people are going to be more aware in dealing with this situation.
All right, now, well, from all you said, we should expect an improvement in security in the near future. But Dennis Amakri, former Director, Department of State Services, thank you so much for your time and your contribution.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's take a break now. The program will be back shortly. Stay with us. All right, welcome back to the program. Nigeria has moved from 6th to 8th in the 2023 Global Terrorism Index, GTI, moving 2 places away from its position in 2022. Is this a good performance or underperformance? Security expert Alaudin Hashim joins me now on the program to discuss about this. Thank you so much for joining me. Now, from 6th to 8th, what do you think? Is this growth or not?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good approach to have somewhat grown beyond what we were in the first place. There were times we were second and third on the GTI index for years, but I think this is largely better, perhaps because of the renewed effort by the recent administration to again redefine what terrorism is, put some legal, regulatory, and institutional framework that help it to contain, prevent, and prosecute issues that borders around terrorism. Recently, government again signed off the Terrorism Prevention Act 2022. That particular framework offers a new dynamic to the conversation around what steps government can take in containing, preventing, and of course, deterring terrorism and terrorism situation. And one of the things that came out from the renewed TPA 2022 is perhaps the definition of what terrorism is, even though if it is broad, and I still find that quite a little bit of a challenge, considering that government and its agencies and proxies might want to hide under some of those provisions to classify even civil society groups as potential groups because one of the sections, because it has about 17 sections in the new TPE, and it says that even information that has capability of distorting or causing panic can be regarded as terrorism. And that for me is an issue that I find very concerned. So the nebulous provision of the definition around terrorism requires a new effort. Yes, government had made a good attempt, but I think there should be some additional effort. Secondly, one thing that also came out clearly is some of the provisions that we found very clearly that dealt with the issue of classification of a group as a terrorist organization. That again, for me, is a fundamental step that we have taken. There's now a committee. There's a Nigerian committee that now has the powers to be able to process an organization and, of course, eventually classify it, whether or not it has actually met that threshold. But the only challenge for me is that it says in a particular section that only the Attorney General has that final fiat, having received approval from the President to classify a group or an individual as a terrorist. And for me, those overwhelming powers in the hands of the Attorney General is something that we really need to also interrogate a lot further. But by and large, I think we have made some significant progress. We have redefined terrorism. We have made some steps to contain, put institutional framework to respond to it. We have prevented some of them from happening. We now have some kind of counterterrorism effort that seem to now be yielding to the right-based approach that we are dealing with. We have made some progress, and I think that is why we have moved from that particular point.
But one thing is clear, though: the growth and continued spread of terrorism worldwide has been highlighted by the important role played by finance. So, what can be done to cut various sources of finance open to terrorist organizations?
Yeah, I think we need to also strengthen our financial regulation system. The NFIU need to find a lot of renewed effort in terms of response. What they have done in recent past by providing some of those checklists that allows for us to have a centralized BVN system. We still think that that hasn't really worked very clearly, because we had the NIN registration that was supposed to harmonize the issue of communication. Then we have the BVN that should also curtail the issue of terrorist financing. And then, of course, we had some government monetary policies that also help to contain, prevent. But I think most importantly is that we must find some social economic efforts that must have to prevent some of those causal factors. What are the push factors? We need to identify and then, of course, respond to them collectively and aggressively. Our social economic challenges are seemingly some of the catalysts that push people into that particular sphere. So we must learn to deal with that. But our banking system also requires some kind of deliberate regulation to contain the sort of illicit activities going on. The banks in recent time has become one of the biggest space for a lot of nefarious activities going on. And the Bankers Committee and the CBN has actually just shown some marginal and not too much of a deliberate response to this. And of course, you saw that even there was an allegation to the immediate past CBN governor to have also been caught in the web of terrorist financing. So what can we do a lot differently? We need to be able to find some of those harmonized systems, some kind of control measures that will help us prevent the reoccurrence, and then, of course, find some kind of method and methodology that would help citizens to be able to understand. I mean, is it fingerprints on monies that you want to put? If you put fingerprints on money, tendencies are there that it is actually going to find some trace. What are the financial intelligence unit mechanisms, framework that we have? And I think NFIU need to step up its game and unbundle the EFCC, and NFIU need to take up a number of more responsibility on its own to be able to manage these whole challenges. Until that is done, we will continue to have some kind of cyclical representation of terrorism and financial regulation. And again, it's the political will that comes with terrorist financing. The past administration, for over 4 years, kept telling us that they had a list they were going to release to the public. That list never saw the light of the day. What exactly went wrong? And I think it is very important to hold that regime to account for the reasons why they kept lying to Nigerians and telling them that they had a list that was generated in consonance with some global platforms like what is it called? That suggests very clearly that we had some lists or names of Nigerians who were financing terrorists, and that we were going to publicly put them in the space, and that never happened.
Why don't you think the past administration lied to
and I think
citizens?
we need to find some kind of answers to that.
You said it's a lie, but the past administration lied to citizens about having a list of terrorists it was going to release. So why would you say it's a lie? What if so we have a new administration? What if they're just stalling for reasons best known to them?
Yeah, but for me, they kept mentioning that they were going to put that list in the public domain, which they never did. So, I mean, that for me established the fact that it was a lie. So if you had any reasons, maybe for security measures that suggest that you were going to backtrack from putting it out there, then you come back and tell us, okay, for sake of national security. And besides, why do you have to contain and conceal information that has to do with national security when you can put it out there as a measure to balkanize that empire? So concealing the information itself is actually aiding and abetting terrorism and terrorist activities because what you are doing, you are offering cover, you are offering some level of protection to those who are involved in it. And I think for me, very clearly, that there is a need for Nigerians to go and continue to demand from the immediate past administration on why that never happened. They owe us an explanation, and they must actually tell Nigerians.
Do you not think that the list was not released? Do you not think, let's look at it from this point, do you not think that the list was not released, you know, to not escalate the level of insecurity we are faced with in the country? Do you not think that that's a possibility?
I mean, what level of insecurity would we be exposed to other than what we already have ourselves exposed to? That particular administration for 8 years recorded fatalities running into hundreds to thousands. And how do you want to, how else do you want to classify exposure to threats? We had people displaced in hundreds of thousands. We had people who left schools and for now had reduced enrollment rates in some parts of the country. In the Northwest particularly, over 618 schools closed because of activities of bandits because they couldn't access schools. Do you know how many people had lost that right to free education as instituted by the Constitution? That you cannot explain. How many Nigerians have actually lost their lives just because they were traveling on highways? How many Nigerians have been carried and picked up in their homes just because they are geographically or geospatially mistakenly on the Nigerian territory? Those are the already imagined threats that we could. So how much more putting those names in the public space? So even if you have failed to put them in the public domain, then what exactly are the alternative measures that the regime took, either in terms of arrest, in terms of containing, in terms of restricting, in terms of providing visa ban. What exactly was the measure that was taken? I think there's a need for an explanation for that to have happened. You couldn't have been carrying a list in your pocket for 8 years, and then of course the administration came and went, and nobody is going to then ask question as to what exactly happened. And I think the new regime, particularly the then Minister of Information, Lai Mohammed, would always mention it freely in every domain that the administration has been able to come up with this list, and they will have worked with Interpol to be able to generate that particular list, and that list was going to be published. And they kept saying it was going to be published, and that never happened. For me, it was actually a way of facilitating an already bad situation, because there's nothing worse that perhaps could have happened in that particular period that we wouldn't have seen. But of course, trying to make sure that you manage and mismanage the information around it. Strategic communication is at the center of counterterrorism efforts. If you mismanage strategic communication, opportunities are there that you are going to send bad signal and send the wrong information out there.
You could go on and on if I let you, but I'm afraid that's how much we can take. Well, security expert Alauddin Hashim, thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Right. And that's how much we can take on this edition of the program. Thank you so much for watching. I am Mary Kanu. Bye for now.